3 Lives, 3 Worlds. Wherever step goes, Lotus blooms. Metamorphosis. By Tangqi. English translated using Google. Lotus Step Chapter 5, Book 1. Since Chengyu left Ping'an City more than a year ago, the Kuju team in Kaiyuanfang has been making $10 a day and feels like it has lost its spiritual leader. It can hardly play any game. After kicking and fussing, he rarely appeared in major Kuju competitions in Beijing. The Anlifang Rijin Dojin team, the second oldest in the team for 10,000 years, finally came to the fore. They dominated the Kuju world in the capital for a year without any defeat and became the dominant team. After dominating for half a year, he forgot that he was defeated by 10 dojin per day. So he changed the name of the team to Duguqiu Bai. As a result, the day after the team name was changed, their nemesis, young Master Jade, returned to the capital. Then in the second 10 days, their nemesis, the young Master Jade, satisfied their desire to be defeated alone and led them to death with 10 duk of gold per day. Under the scorching sun, all the heroes who were fighting for gold had tears in their eyes, looking at the scoreboard of 15-3 from Chengyu's careless movement of tilting his head and lifting his front to wipe sweat. And from Chengyu's when I lifted up my front to wipe my sweat, the young ladies and young wives in the stands saw the ultimate in their eyes, which were so hot that they could melt iron into copper. The idol of young girls and young wives in Ping'an City, the young master of Kuju, Cheng Yuyu, was squatting in his friendly Muzhou's herbal medicine shop and counting the banknotes he had won one by one. He looked at the people squatting opposite her with some emotion. Li Muzhou, who was counting the banknotes, expressed his thoughts. It's all hard-earned money. Li Muzhou nodded and said, "No one believes that your team can beat Rijin Dojin and their 10 goals. Fortunately, I was brave enough to follow you." This vote won enough to open a free clinic for 3 months. Chengyu buried his head and took out 3 of the banknotes he had counted and pushed the rest to Li Muzhou. "Here, it's enough to open a free clinic for a year." Li Muzhou wondered, "Aren't you short of money?" Chengyu folded the 3 banknotes into small dried tofu, put them in his purse, patted them, and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "It's okay, I make money quickly. These 3 bills are enough for emergencies." Hearing the sound of footsteps coming from outside the shop, Chengyu fell to the ground with a plop. Her lips turned pale with fright, and she mouthed to Li Muzhou, "Why is Zhu Jin here? Does he know that I asked you to bet on the ball for me?" She was a little unable to stand. He got up, crawled, and hid in the back room. "I'm going to be beaten to death when it's over." Li Muzhou was also stunned, but quickly calmed down. "I won't confess to you. Don't worry." While quickly stuffing the banknote into his chest, he rubbed Chengyu into the bed where the patient was lying, and also after kicking him, he sat upright on the edge of the bed and picked up a book. Runontong is a shop with a front and a backyard. The shop is connected to a small corridor that leads directly to the patio. There is a small room at the entrance of the corridor for the seriously ill to rest, so it is only blocked by a dark cloth curtain. Zhu Jin stood in front of the curtain and knocked on the door frame before lifting the curtain and entering. Li Muzhou pretended that he was concentrating on the book in his hand. There were obviously 2 wooden stools in the room, but Zhu Jin sat on the edge of the bed. Chengyu was lying under the bed, looking at Zhu Jin's boots lying in front of her nose, her hands shaking with nervousness. Zhu Jin said warmly to Li Muzhou, "Let me see how your injury is." Chengyu remembered that she accidentally fell into the river last time while walking at night and lost half her life when she was rescued. Zhu Jin's voice was not half as caring as it was now. She couldn't help but become curious. How seriously was Xiaoli injured? While he was thinking wildly, he heard Li Muzhou himself confused. "Injury? What injury?" Then there was a rustle, and Zhu Jin seemed to hold Li Muzhou's sleeve. "Didn't you make a cut here when you cut the medicinal materials yesterday?" There was a cut on Li Muzhou's left index finger. But it was a wound that wouldn't be obvious even if you weren't paying attention. Changyu's whole body and mind were silent. Zhu Jin asked Li Muzhou with concern, "Will there be any scars?" Changyu coldly answered for Li Muzhou in his heart, "It should be difficult." Li Muzhou himself seemed not to have considered the issue of leaving scars at all, and said briskly, It doesn't matter. Here's Yujin's deep voice. No matter what, don't do heavy work these days, remember to apply ointment. And then said, I have cut the herbs you brought in to cut for you, so don't search for them in the yard anymore. Busy here and there. Probably because he heard that he didn't have to work anymore, Li Muzhou said happily. The two chatted some more about the flowers and plants growing in Li Muzhou's medicinal garden. It wasn't until Cheng Yu lay down under the bed that she was almost paralyzed, and Zhu Jin left. Li Muzhou quickly dragged her out. I don't think Zhu Jin is here to find you, he concluded. Chen Yu glanced at him slowly dusted off his knees, and said with complicated emotions, I feel the same way. Li Muzhou was a little puzzled. Since he didn't come here to see you, why has he been so idle recently? He still has time to come to my place for a walk and help me with all the work. Chen Yu sat by the bed and thought hard for a while. As you said, it's really puzzling that he cares about you so much. She came up with a very scary idea. Shaoli, are you suffering from a terminal illness? You. He was beaten out of Renantang by Shaoli. Qingyu ran out of Renantang in disgrace. Seeing that it was late, he hurriedly ran towards Kulela. But she loves to watch the excitement, and can't help but stop when she encounters a place where people gather together. In addition, she is soft-hearted, and she likes to open her wallet to show love when she sees something tragic. She stopped and showed love all the way. When they arrived at Kulela, she turned her purse upside down. She was surprised to find that there was only a small silver note of 10 taels left in it. There are 3 major gold-selling caves in Ping'an City, and Kailai Tower ranks in front of Mengxian Tower and Linling Pavilion. People at that time said, don't go into Kailai if you don't have money. They were referring to Kailai Tower. It only costs 7 or 8 taels of silver to sleep with a girl in Linling Pavilion of Mengxian Tower. But when you enter Kailai Tower, you can't even order 2 good dishes. So when Qingyu was led to the private room on the 2nd floor by the waiter, and saw a table of delicacies inside at the door, and Lian Song sitting next to the table of delicacies, adding silver bone charcoal to a silver stove, she felt her destiny, cruelty, and his own helplessness. But the etiquette and customs of the Dashi dynasty are like this. Whoever invites you to a meal will pay. If you go to a restaurant to entertain people to a meal without bringing enough money, this is an intentional insult and you will be beaten. Even if she let Lian San down, she still couldn't invite Lian San to a meal. After dinner, Lian San was even more offended by having him pay the bill. Qingyu rubbed his forehead and hid in the porch thinking about the predicament at hand. Kulela was a place where credit was not allowed. Shaoli's Renantang was much closer than Shawalu, but even if he ran back to Shaoli to get the money, it would take half an hour longer to run back, which was no different than flying 3 pigeons. She was at a loss. Through the crack in the door, he saw 2 people standing respectfully beside Lian San. One looked like a maid, and the other was the 4th sister Wen, the head chef of Kailai Building. When Si was lowering his head to talk to Lian San, and she heard something, knife fish has many thorns. 3rd young master's knife skills are good. He slices neatly and removes the thorns very cleanly, so he cooks the fish meat over a high heat until it is as white as jade and does not fall apart, and it's done. The stunning maid sighed. How to identify the fish meat when it is as white as jade and does not dissipate? My master and I are both a bit confused at this. Hey, we also failed at this step last time. Cheng Yu understood that this was Lian Sanjing learning how to simmer soup with 4th sister Wen. She was a little confused for a moment, because it was obvious that Lian San was not compatible with simmering soup together. Although she wanted to be a matchmaker between Lian San and Hua Feiwu, once she saw clearly what Lian San looked like, she felt that only a life like Mei Zhenhezi living in seclusion could be suitable for him. Playing the piano and painting under the bright moon, this is what he should do with his appearance. But at this moment, she vaguely recalled that when she first met Lian San, he was shopping at Xiaoduku. When she met him again, he was shopping at a brothel, and when she saw him this morning, he was shopping again. At this time, she thought helplessly, I'm learning to make soup from a cook. There was a sudden noise in the corridor. Several strong men carried a big box upstairs. When they passed Qingyu, they politely said to her, "Little master, please give way." Changyu watched in confusion as the strong men carried the box into the elegant room where Lian San was. The box was opened. When he saw clearly what the giant device that was 1 foot long and 7 feet high was, Changyu covered his head. Covered his forehead. "Oh my God, no way," she thought to herself. The beautiful maid in the room looked at the device and was quite happy. "Young master is very thoughtful. I will definitely not fail this time." She then said gently to the confused fourth sister one. "Last time I remembered to put down the fish meat. Fourth sister, you cooked it for exactly half an hour. No more and no less, right?" Wen Si looked unfazed. "About half an hour, but whether it's not more or less, this slave has never calculated it. The slave always just looks at the quality of the fish and takes it out of the pot when it feels it's about the same." While the maid and Wen Si were talking, Lian Song adjusted the 10-foot-long wooden device. After adjusting the device, he used a shovel to light the charcoal fire in the silver furnace. When the golden flames ignited, he stood up and turned the driving lever of the huge device, watching the wooden gears slowly turning. He walked back to the 8 immortals' table with a table of dishes. The sound of gears turning slowly echoed in the room, and it actually had a melodious and ancient sound. The maid had already stopped talking to Wen Si and promptly handed over a wet handkerchief. After finishing everything, Lian San took over and slowly wiped his hands, wiping them inch by inch. Then he raised his eyes slightly and looked towards the door. "How long have you been lingering there? Have you thought about coming in?" Tianbu heard that the Third Highness and his colleagues had made an appointment for lunch here today. Since the only person in the entire dynasty who had been able to make appointments with the Third Highness several times was the Imperial Master, she always thought that the one they were waiting for was the Imperial Master. But at this time, His Highness the Third Prince didn't speak in a tone that sounded like he was addressing the Imperial Master. She couldn't help but be curious and looked up at the door. First, I saw a hand grabbing the door frame. It was a very delicate hand with a beautiful shape. It was a little small, like the hand of a young boy or a little girl. After a while, a slender child moved out from the door frame little by little. He was said to be a young man because he had all his black hair tied up and was wearing a men's kuju costume, dressed like a young boy. But when Tianbu saw the face clearly, he couldn't help but gasped. "It's such an outstanding face." She still remembered that the goddess Hahui beside the Third Highness was already a famous beauty all over the world, but this young man's face was much better than the goddess Hahui. It's just that he is still young, like a flower waiting to bloom, and his beauty is a bit reserved. But it is already conceivable that when this flower will one day fully bloom, only the 4 words, extraordinary color and appearance, can describe its stunning beauty. Tianbu was stunned. At the door of the elegant room, Qingyu bravely moved himself out from the porch. After Lian San wiped his hands, he handed the towel to Tianbu and asked her, "Don't you want to come in?" Changyu opened the door. "Yeah." Lian San looked at her. "Why?" She looked behind Lian San and paused for a while. "Is that the 7-wheeled sand clock?" She lifted the door frame, raised her right hand, moved her wrist, and pointed at the clock that occupied half of the entire private room. Wooden installation. When those strong men unloaded the boxes outside, Chengyu knew that what they were carrying in was a 7-wheeled sand clock. The 7-wheel sand clock is the most accurate timepiece in the world today. Its principle is to use quicksand to drive 7 gears in a row to push the pointer on the dial to measure time. It was an invention during the period of the Imperial Master Su and the part-time Qi-Tian supervisor. There are only a few. She had seen one in the palace of the Queen Mother. Xinyu sighed. "Didn't you hear it crying so sadly?" Tianbu, who had been quietly observing Xinyu, wondered if he had heard it wrong. There was silence in the room for a moment. It was not until His Highness the Third Prince also asked, "What did you say?" that Tianbu felt that he might not have heard it correctly. Auditory hallucinations. "Didn't you hear the 7-wheel sand clock cry so sadly?" Changyu repeated. "Maybe it feels that it has been overused, and it is crying so hard." She said quite seriously, "You know, it is the king of sand clocks, and it can be killed and cannot be humiliated." She stopped after a while. I was sobbing while listening to it, and I felt a little uncomfortable. At this point, she finally compiled the entire logical chain and could answer Lian San's question of why she was holding the door open and refused to go in, so I don't think I'll come in. She coughed and said, I'm most afraid of hearing people cry. After discerning Lian San's expression, she added, it's the same thing when I'm sitting at the door. Brother Lian San, you haven't eaten yet, so you can use yours. She pursed her lips and said, I'll just sit here and stay with you. She thought about it this way. If he used this table of food for 3 consecutive times, he would be embarrassed to ask her to pay the bill after it was finished. She just acted out of the blue. In fact, if she were facing 2 mortals, she might be able to fool them with her talkative talk. But she was facing 2 gods. As a god, Tianbu knows very well about strange powers and chaos. The 7-wheeled sand clock in front of him shows no signs of becoming a spirit at all, so Tianbu doesn't understand what the stunning young man in front of him is talking about. Is it really crying? But she heard Her Highness respond like this. Then, she heard Her Highness actually ask, You're still crying very sadly, aren't you? Tianbu thinks the world is really wonderful. Yeah, I cried so much that I was crying. The young man answered firmly and then retreated to the porch. Qingyu, who retreated into the porch, felt that she had passed the test. She was about to breathe a sigh of relief when she heard Lian San say, Did I give you permission to stay there and guard me? Come in. Qingyu looked confused. Didn't I just say? You just said. Lian San interrupted her. Sure, cook cannot be killed because I use it to set the time to cook fish soup. This 7-wheel sand clock is crying so hard that you can't bear to sit in and listen to it cry, so I won't come in. Obviously, the word straight pumping is a new word to His Highness Third Highness, and when Tianbu heard him say this, he paused imperceptibly. Lian San described the whole thing clearly in one short sentence and summed up her logic perfectly. Qingyu blinked. Then why are you still? His Highness the Third Prince's eyes seemed to have glanced at the 7 wheels of sand clock, and his voice was very calm. I brought it here just to make soup for you. I think that even if it cried and passed away, you should also sit in and drink it. Soup, while listening to it cry. Qingyu was stuck. For a long time, she covered her forehead and pretended to have a headache, rubbed her eyes until they turned red, and said softly and embarrassedly, But when I get closer, I feel a headache. If I sit in, I don't think I can stand it. As she said this, she quietly raised her eyes and glanced at him 3 times. Lian San smiled and said calmly, Then I can only let you sit in, endure the headache, drink soup, and listen to it cry. Qingyu was stuck again. This time she was really stuck. She couldn't figure out how to answer for a long time. After a moment of silence, she said, Brother Lian San, you are too cruel. Lian San nodded. It's a bit cruel. Qingyu has basically been letting others do nothing to her since she was a child. For the first time in her life, she felt the pain of being unable to do anything to others. She actually felt a little remorse for her friends who had been tortured by her in the past. She stood there blankly, leaning on the door frame and worrying seriously, thinking that after going around in such a big circle and working hard for so long, she still had to go in to pay the bill, but she didn't bring any money. Now she tells Lian San that she came here without bringing enough money. Will Lian San forgive her? Can their friendship last forever? She looked up at Lian San and saw that Lian San was also looking at her. She had always felt that something was wrong, but now looking at Lian San's face, she finally realized what was wrong. She was silent for a moment. Brother Lian San, I'm actually a bit smart. Oh! I'd like to hear the details. You didn't bring the 7-wheel sand clock here just to make soup for me. She said firmly, today, because I said I wanted to take you to a restaurant, I asked you to wait at K-Lai building. Do you think you have nothing to do? I just wanted to try making that fish soup again when I was free. You were just lying to me. The more she said, the more she felt that was the case, but you always couldn't cook it well in the past because you couldn't tell the difference. When is the right time to cook the fish? That's why you brought this 7-wheel sand clock. It's just because you want to make the soup successfully. It has nothing to do with me at all. Oh, Lian Song said, "You mean you don't want to drink the soup that wasn't specially made for you, right?" He concluded calmly, "What's so difficult about this? I'll make another soup just for you right away. The pot is ready." Chenyu nodded, "So I," and immediately shook his head. No, but his forehead accidentally hit the door frame. She exhaled softly. It didn't hurt, but it was interrupted. Her brain a little nodded. "Is that what I mean?" she asked Lian San doubtfully. Lian San lowered his head. She couldn't see his face, but could only hear his voice. She heard him say in a low and lonely voice, "Yes, you think this pot of soup is not made just for you." Tianvu witnessed all this and felt like he had seen a ghost. Chang Yu murmured, "That's not right." This time she finally controlled herself and stopped being sidetracked by Lian Song. She covered the hit forehead with her right hand. "I think what I meant is, because Brother Lian San is not a professional. The fish soup was cooked for me, so it doesn't matter if I don't drink it. Brother Lian San can drink it alone, and I'll be here with you." When he finished speaking, the sand clock happened to have passed half a moment, and the shortest mark on the dial, a wooden thrush as big as a thumb, suddenly popped out of the pointer and sang gracefully. He glanced at her 3 times without saying anything. He just reached out and opened the simmering soup pot. The soup was simmering properly, and a fresh fragrance immediately hit his nostrils. Fourth Sister Wen quietly spoke to Tianvu, "The quality of this fish meat is as white as jade and does not dissipate." Third Young Master, "The soup was simmered just right this time." Tianvu hummed and saw Lian Song stretch out his right hand. The servant's instinct allowed her to quickly and accurately hand over a gold-painted porcelain bowl with broken branches and flowers, even when her mind was wandering. Chenyu woke up early today. He didn't even take a bite of his meal before he was rushed to the Kuju field by the boys from the Kuju team. After struggling all morning, he was already hungry. When he smelled the strong aroma of the soup, his stomach immediately growled. With one sound, the empty city plan was sung. She had never been so hungry in her life, and she couldn't help but look down at her belly in a daze. Lian San had already filled the soup, and his eyes were still on her belly. Qilu and Shazhong should have stopped crying. "Are you still unwilling to come in?" Chenyu held his stomach, looked around, and stammered, "Why did I hear it? It's still." Lian San said, "You don't need to treat me to this meal. I have already paid the bill. Come in." Chang Yu was stunned for a moment. I'm not, I just." Seeing her whole face turning red little by little, she hesitated. "Brother Lian San, how do you know?" "You know that I am." He raised his eyebrows 3 times. "I know you just don't have any money, so you keep making excuses?" Chang Yu immediately said, "I didn't mean not to bring enough money, and I didn't mean to look down on you or tease you." She quickly raised her head to look at Lian San, and then immediately lowered her head. "Are you not angry?" Lian San said, "There is no anger." Chang Yu was obviously surprised. "Aren't you angry? The last time I let you go, I was already very rude, and this time I do it again. I'm really sorry for you. Are you really not angry?" Lian San glanced at her. "You also know that you are sorry for me." Chang Yu lowered his head in shame, but couldn't help but wonder. "Then why aren't you angry?" He glanced at her again. "Maybe it's because you are stupid." Chang Yu's eyes widened, obviously surprised. "Where am I stupid? Every time I tell lies, I expose you. How do you say that you are not stupid anymore?" Chang Yu was immediately discouraged after hearing this and said gloomily, "That's just because I'm not very good at that." As she spoke, her stomach suddenly growled again, her face turned red, and she covered herself against the door frame. He was holding his belly, looking like he didn't know what to do. The third prince's mouth curved, and he reached out to move the bowl of soup he had just filled to the side of the 8 immortals' table facing the door. He clicked a little on the side of the closed folding fan and said to her, "Anyway, let's eat something first." She hesitated for a while, then shuffled in with a blushing face and sat down obediently where Lian San indicated for her to sit down. She wiped her hands and served the soup. Before drinking the soup, she muttered in a low voice, "Sentence, I think I'm pretty smart." His face was still red. Tianbu digested it for a long time before accepting the fact that His Highness actually recognized a foster brother in the mortal world. It is already remarkable that His Highness the Third Prince can speak more than 2 words to a mortal. Today he actually spoke a lot with this young boy, most of them boring words, which shocked Tianbu. She thought, is it because this little boy is good-looking? But in Tianbu's impression over the past 10,000 years, His Highness the Third Highness is not such a superficial person. Bai Qian, the legendary most beautiful woman in the God clan, and her brother Baizhen, logically speaking, may be more beautiful than this young man, but I don't see His Highness having any friendship with Baizhen. Tianbu rarely got distracted again. When she was distracted, the two of them had almost finished the meal. They had talked occasionally before, but Tianbu didn't hear it clearly. At this time, she suddenly heard Her Highness say calmly, I have a lot of free time today. Tianbu's eyelids twitched and he denied in his heart, Your Highness, you are not idle today. There is a desk of documents in the study for you to deal with. The Imperial Master handed over a message saying that he would come to visit in the afternoon. Princess Yanlan also said that there are a few I will show you the painting this afternoon. Although she did not hear clearly what the two of them said before, she felt that she understood the intention of His Highness's words. Cheng Yu also understood the intention of His Highness Third Highness. She blinked and thought that what Lian San meant was that he had nothing to do today, so she needed to accompany him for the whole day. There is nothing wrong with this. After all, this meal was invited 3 times in a row, and she ate it happily. As a human being, you should always repay kindness. But the only problem is that she only has 10 taels of silver with her. What entertainment can she find for spending 10 taels of silver? She said then. For a while and then suggested, then let's go listen to books later. Lian San drank the soup slowly without making any comment. Watching a show? Lian San still didn't express his opinion. Chihuahuan. Mushi? She even came up with swing. Lian San put down the bowl and looked at her as if she was a retard. Qingyu scratched his head and accidentally took off his forehead protector, then hurriedly tied it back on again. While tying it, he said, Since you don't like these, she thought for a while, then I'll take you to a place where it's a novel place. She rolled her eyes as she recalled, although Brother Lian San, you are very picky, but you probably won't be picky about that place. You will definitely like it. After Kay came to the building for lunch, Tianbu was sent back to his residence by His Highness, while Her Highness was sent by Cheng Yu to stay in Lian Mansion's carriage. Qingyu watched the curtains on the carriage being lowered, then turned into the medicinal shop diagonally opposite Kalai building. He hurriedly ordered half a caddy of realgar powder, a few heads of garlic, and a few pieces of gauze, and squatted there to tinker for a while. I made several fist-sized gauze balls. When the sudden change occurred, Qingyu was putting a few gauze balls into a thick paper bag with fresh tung oil and carrying them out of the door. When she saw people running away on the street, she didn't know what happened, and then she saw a person who had just passed by. The rouge stall and the jewelry stall were knocked down one after another. Oh, she knew what was going on. Public security in the capital is good most of the time, but the emperor has many dandies at his feet. In 10.5 months, everyone will have to fight over things like cockfighting and lackeys snatching girls. The sound of swords clashing reached Cheng Yu's ears, and she thought, wow, they did a pretty big job today, even using knives. As a result, when the crowd fled and left the fighting arena naked, she saw that the battle in front of her was no small matter. In the middle of the street dozens of steps away, a group of masked men were attacking a young man in black with a knife. Woman in white. There were 7 or 8 masked men, each move was very cruel, and every move was aimed at killing someone. Fortunately, the young man in black was very skilled, and while protecting the woman wearing a power fence beside him, he was able to defeat 7 or 8 people, and he still had the upper hand. The young man's figure and sword moves became extremely fast. Qingyu couldn't see clearly the young man's appearance, and she had no intention of watching the excitement. Although young Master Yu is good at everything from horseback riding, archery, and kuju, young Master Yu does not know how to use martial arts. She knew her own worth. As soon as she understood that this was a script for an assassination in the street, she immediately turned around and went into the medicine shop, took up a position next to the young man and hid honestly. Half of the pedestrians on the long street were quickly cleared, and the other half who couldn't run fast were still screaming and running away. In the crowd, an old woman was pushed and fell in front of the medicine shop. The street is so chaotic. If two young and strong men accidentally step on her, this old woman will die. In fact, Cheng Yu was a little scared by the flash of swords, but she couldn't bear it when she looked at the old woman. She exhaled, dropped the paper bag on the ground, and ran out with her waist high. As a result, as soon as he helped the old woman up and planned to half help and half drag her into the drugstore, he saw a large knife whirling towards her. Cheng Yu was stunned. The moment his eyes passed over Cheng Yu, Ji Mingfeng was startled. Then he saw the knife heading towards her. Before he said the word, dodge, the sharp sword in his hand was gone and he chased after her. The person also followed the sword and chased after her. Originally, the 7 men in black had been almost repaired by Ji Mingfeng. 3 were dead and 4 were seriously injured. The one who was the most capable of fighting took his last breath in front of the ground and nailed the weapon to Qin Sume, who was hiding beside him. When he turned around and deflected the knife, he didn't expect that there was a big stabbing person standing on the side where it flew past. Standing like a jade. Ji Mingfeng knew that Cheng Yu was clever. She was almost the smartest girl he knew, but today when the danger was so great, she watched the long knife flying past and stood there motionless. No matter how fast the chasing sword was, it could not catch up with the long knife that was 1 step ahead. Ji Mingfeng felt chills all over. Seeing that the tip of the knife was only 2 or 3 feet away from Cheng Yu, a closed folding fan suddenly flew out of the diagonal stab. The folding fan was completely black except for a little red light at the bottom of the fan. I don't know what it was. Just when the tip of the knife was about 2 feet away from Cheng Yu, the fan hit the blade accurately, making a clanging sound. It was obvious that the fan bone was made of metal. The entire long knife deflected sharply. But even if the entire fan is made of black iron, it should be a light thing that cannot block the power of the long sword. But it was such a light thing, but it knocked a long knife that weighed 20 or 30 kilograms and flew out diagonally. A couplet was engraved on the door of the medicine shop where Cheng Yu had just been hiding, which read, "There are no magic medicines in the fairyland, but there are wonderful recipes in the market." The frightening long knife that was knocked out by the folding fan had its tip inserted into the word, "Qi," and penetrated the wood 3 inches, showing the profound skill of the fan thrower. With such a strong force, it stands to reason that the long knife would produce a reaction force after being hit by the folding fan, and it would not be able to push it back along the original path. But for some reason, after the black fan collided with the long knife, it actually moved along the same path. He flew back the way he came, and his destination seemed to be a luxury carriage parked across the street. The moment the folding fan approached, a hand stretched out from behind the curtain of the carriage. A fair and slender hand was exposed from the bottom of the silver-white sleeve. There was an indescribable elegance in the bright sunlight. It was a man's hand. The black folding fan fell into the man's hand. The hand caressed the fan handle casually and then took it back. Under the scorching sun, when the long knife came towards his face, Cheng Yu felt that he didn't think of anything at that moment. She didn't think about anything, but the sporadic knife shadows in the ancient tombs of Nanran Kingdom suddenly flashed back in her mind like ghost shadows, and a kind female voice whispered in her ears, "Don't be afraid, Commander." "Lord, don't be afraid." As the female voice sounded, his vision blurred into a blur, and Cheng Yu felt dazed for a moment. When the long knife struck, the old woman who was half supported by Cheng Yu did not see this shocking scene because her back was to the fighting field. When the knife pierced the couplet in the medicine shop, she didn't know what happened, but she just saw Cheng Yu. He pulled her up as soon as she moved. Fortunately, the young man who took the medicine in the shop was a bit brave. He immediately ran out and helped the old woman into the shop, then turned around and went to help Cheng Yu. Only then did Cheng Yu react in a daze. but her vision was still blurry. She looked around blankly and found that there were no people on the street, leaving only herself and a young man in black about 10 steps away. The girl in white stood farther away. Her eyes were still blurry, and she could only make out a rough outline of human figures. She knew in her heart that these two people must be the man and woman who had just been besieged by the masked men. She didn't understand what the current situation was, so she wiped her eyes with her sleeves. When Chengyu wiped his eyes, Ji Mingfeng took a step forward, but did not come any closer. He looked at her from that distance without saying a word. Liansong originally lifted the car curtain to see if Chengyu was frightened, but Ji Mingfeng's gaze fixed on Chengyu, and his involuntary approach happened to fall into his eyes. He lifted up the carriage curtain and hung it on the black jade hook inside, and picked up the book he had been casually browsing while waiting for Chengyu, but he had no intention of flipping through it, just rolled it up in his hand. He sat in the carriage and looked at the two people. His eyes were flat, and the book in his right hand was tapping his knees one by one. When Chengyu wiped her eyes, she felt someone was looking at her. When her eyes were clear, she looked up and met Ji Mingfeng's gaze. She was blinded for a while, and then all the blood drained from her face in an instant. The man stretched out his hand. "Of course it's not your fault, and you didn't cause me any trouble." He paused. "I just hope you can be more alert when encountering accidents in the future." Ji Mingfeng saw the man pulling Chengyu into the carriage. From the beginning to the end, he did not see the man's appearance, nor did he see the expression on Chengyu's face after the man said those words. His fingers holding the hilt of the sword were a little stiff with force. The inspector in front of him was still talking about something, but Ji Mingfeng didn't notice it at all. He suddenly remembered what Chengyu had called him before. She used to affectionately call him Prince Brother. That actually seemed like a long time ago. Ji Mingfeng stood there for a long time. End of Lotus Step Chapter 5, Book 1. By Tangqi. Translated in English using Google.